a few hours long, and we're trying to go in depth on giving you guys advice on how to establish a Power Platform center of excellence and an overall governance strategy for the platform. Just fast forward a slide here. In terms of, got a number of presenters. I'm Adam Worobec. I'm a managing director at Tallan. We're a Microsoft partner, working very closely with Microsoft, our mutual clients, across a number of digital transformation initiatives and Power Platform and the whole phenomenon of enabling power users to help our, and sort of complement our professional developers achieve our digital transformation goals is a key part of what we're doing. We're joined today with a couple of my colleagues, as well as one of the specialists from Microsoft that we work pretty closely with. So I'll go ahead and toss it over to you for a quick intro, Eden.
Thank you so much, Adam. Hi, everyone. My name is Eden Porsangi. I'm a technical specialist here at Microsoft, and my primary focus is Power Apps, Power Automate, as well as Power Virtual Agents. And I have been working with quite a bit of our customers on governance, administration, management of the platform, as well as getting Center of Excellence starter kits up and enabled. So very excited about our session today, and hopefully it is beneficial for you as well. I'll pass the torch over back to the Tallan folks.
Christina, you want to do a quick intro?
Yes, hi, my name is Christina Tillbrook, and I'm a senior UX consultant with Tallan. And I specialize in Power Platform governance strategy, planning, and Power App and Power Automate development. And I also do have a background in accessibility. I do install Center of Excellence toolkits, starter kits, and help clients with setting up their governance structures. So today I'll be covering client deployment strategies for Power Platform governance. I'm going to be talking about roles and responsibilities and client paths forward.
And my name is Ben Dewey. I'm the VP of Apps and Experiences at Tallan. We're kind of the boots on the ground with a lot of our application projects as well as our governance projects. And I'll be focusing on the nurture section, which kind of aligns nicely with both figuring out how, what type of new apps might be applicable to Power Platform, but also how to, embrace that community and help them to innovate and to bring their apps to life.
Beautiful. Thanks, team. If those of you in the audience have questions, we want to encourage you to type them into the chat. We've got a few additional folks from Tallan monitoring the chat inside of Teams, and they'll be more than happy to interrupt us when your questions pop in, and we can handle them kind of as they come up, as they're in the relevant sections that you ask them, rather than maybe waiting till the end. Another housekeeping item is Teams has some new capability around accessibility. Eden, I know this is a dear to your heart. You want to kind of explain how to potentially leverage some of that for those that have the latest features?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Adam. So yes, you guys might notice that we have live captions on. There is a capability within Teams. If you click on the three dots on the top, where it says more actions, those ellipses, it gives you the ability to turn on or turn off live captions. You also have the ability to turn on transcription. So for those folks who might be deaf or hard of hearing, or perhaps have different levels of language proficiency, they can definitely use those capabilities so that they can be able to follow along the presentation. So if you do notice that subtitle on the bottom as we're moving forward with our presentation, that will be the reason why. So thanks.
Pretty cool use of technology. All right, I wanted to kind of get us out of the gate with a little bit of an overview. I think it's probably safe to say that most of you are here because you've been asked to help deploy Power Platform around your company, but I don't want to assume anything. And just so zooming out a little bit, talking about the opportunity for technologies like the Power Platform. So I'm sure you've probably heard the term shadow IT. If you haven't, it's basically been around since the beginning of technology being used in the business environment. We've had folks in the business side that were savvy and curious and would use tools and technologies, and they didn't work under the IT department, but they would use these tools and technologies to build solutions for whatever their department or their team needed. For a lot of years, this was, somebody took access, learned it really well, found that, oh, look, there's this hidden developer tab. Let me turn it on, and oh, wow, there's this VBA code I could write in here and create, an application within Excel. And Access had these same features, but inevitably, one of the challenges that brought about was there would be a day, in many cases that would come around where the thing would stop working. And the reason it would stop working is because some of these desktop tools had limits. For a long time, Excel had a 1,000,000 row limit. So if you went and loaded more than 1,000,000 rows of data into Excel, it would stop, performing. Or you could write a bad query and it would not perform as well as you'd like. And anyways, when things go wrong with technical matters, people call their IT department. The reason it's shadow IT is because obviously if you built something on your own desktop in Excel, IT had no idea you were doing that. And then it's unfair to bring them in when it doesn't work and ask them to help troubleshoot it. So part of the opportunity here with something like the Power Platform is you'll see it lives in the cloud. And so if it's in the cloud, it's in the open. And we can give folks a place to develop. What we as admins can then have a place with the tools that we're going to be talking about this afternoon, a place where we can see what they're doing and help them be successful and not have them be living in the quote unquote shadows. That obviously enables a huge scaling component in our companies, right? There's just too much to do for our professional development teams or IT departments to handle it all. Many times IT departments are being asked to do more with less. So they've got to focus on the most strategic and the most valuable projects. And a lot of times, some of the big wins to a department aren't, on the radar of the overall corporation, right? If I've got a team of 3 and we're just trying to take a paper process and make it more efficient, that's never going to get IT funding for professional developers to build something. Whereas if we had the tools to do it and somebody savvy enough to learn the platform, we could take care of our own needs. And that's essentially the complement here is our citizen developers complementing our professional developers and helping the overall organization achieve those digital transformation goals, right? So much business is still done on paper in old-fashioned ways and inefficient ways, and all this together using modern cloud-based technologies, people being able to build their own apps is very exciting to move the whole organization forward. So if it was only that easy, right? If we could just take power tools and just unleash them on our organization, that would be, well, a very short seminar. We could probably stop right here. And that's why Microsoft invented the Power Platform. If you're not familiar, it's kind of an umbrella term for a number of tools that start with the word power. Today's session, we're going to be focusing a lot on Power Apps and Power Automate. Power Virtual Agents squeeze in to everything you're hearing today pretty easily. I did want to make one point about Power BI, though. If you're interested or you've been tasked to govern Power BI, there's some additional things. At a high level, the 40,000 foot level, I think the process will be the same. But when you get into managing data-heavy environments, tools, and that whole self-service element of reporting and dashboarding, there's some slight differences than what you would do when you're building apps. And so definitely want to bring that to your attention. If you're interested in that level or that track, either because you're doing apps and you have to govern Power BI, or maybe you just want to govern Power BI, let us know in the chat, and we can certainly follow up with a session dedicated on those specifics around Power BI. So again, if it was only as easy as licensing, but unfortunately, these tools need governance, and the reason they need governance is because these resourceful power users that we've got in organizations, if we let them go kind of ungoverned, we could end up with kind of the Wild West scenario, right? And eventually it'll have to get cleaned up. So it's better if we start out of the gate and kind of think it through and roll it out at a measured pace. And what governance really means, it's kind of this balancing act. You've got power users who are asking for these tools. You see the need and the value that it could potentially bring. And on the other hand, we've, as an organization, have risks that we want to manage, right? Our admins and our executives want to sleep well at night. We want to know that data is not flying out the door, and we're not going to make the news as the latest hack. And that ultimately, this balancing act is created where we want to help the power users. We want them essentially to feel like they're on the highway, able to go 60, 70, 80 miles an hour, but they've got those guardrails in place that if something happens, it's there to protect them essentially, right? It's you know, we don't want the data accidentally going out the door if it's not being shared in the proper way, and the tool should just stop them so that they don't do it and go afoul of any policies that we have as an organization. Some common questions that we hear that we want to kind of answer for you throughout this afternoon's session, and as you go through this, you might be hearing some of this yourselves. One of the big ones is, okay, if we're going to have this core team that supports the governance of the platform, the last thing we'd want is for this team to have to grow as the adoption of the platform grows. So how do we keep our support team lean, yet enable, you know, our thousands and sometimes tens or hundreds of thousands of employees to be able to leverage these tools? So we definitely want to address that in today's session. Another one is, what if we don't have that single one team that can own the Power Platform? What do we do in that case? And we've got some ideas and some examples from clients that have taken a little bit more of a committee-based approach, as well as leveraging technology to potentially help folks, you know, police the environment, plus help folks kind of police their own users. The next one there, what if our power users are getting impatient? There's kind of two sides to this. You could have, well, one of them I think is really good. You've got business users asking, when am I going to get the license? When are you going to be ready? I'm ready to build stuff now, and that's demand, and that's a good thing. The other side you might run into is, as you start to design these processes, you might, for example, ask your IT department about application development when it comes to Power Apps. Well, how are they doing professional development? Is there anything we can leverage? And a lot of enterprise application development will have, you know, a pretty formal process, multiple environments like dev, UAT, testing, prod. You might have, you know, change controls and toll gates to go through, and there'll be this sort of balance to strike again, where what if I'm just a power user building something, you know, for a meeting with my boss this Friday? Are you going to say that I have to have a dev environment and I have to make some kind of a request before I could show them the report? It's a little heavy, right? And so it's that kind of balance that might feel, you know, like everybody just wants to bang down your door and get going, and you're trying to sort of, strike that even keel. And then the last question there, what if we deployed the Power Platform before establishing a governance process? So we've seen this as well, and it's okay. There's certainly, you know, we'll show you some of the tools that are available, ways to kind of go back and look. Certainly better to get out ahead of it, but again, with impatient users, it may not be a possibility. And so, you know, in the spirit of, again, balancing things, there might be a way to kind of phase in a governance strategy, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Christina in a second here to kind of dive in, but overall, we're going to walk through, you know, kind of started with aligning around goals. So hopefully you're figuring out for your organization, what is those big drivers that are having people ask, or your leadership is looking into these platforms. What are they trying to achieve? As we get into the overall vision, you know, we've got this center of excellence mentality that's going to cover both the way the platform's administered, as well as, you know, in Ben's section, how you're nurturing those power users. And that, you know, is going to go a long way to helping answer that question about how do we keep our team lean. Speaking of our teams, there's various roles and responsibilities. So we'll map those out and kind of give you some ideas of what hats need to be worn, and then you can start to maybe figure out who in your organization is going to map to those hats. And then an overall, you know, deployment strategy, and this gets into some of those phases of how to get the program out. And then Eden's going to cover administration and governance. So obviously we want to secure this platform before we can, you know, manage anything. We want to be able to monitor what's going on. The monitoring often leads to alerting. The alerting can lead to automation, and all that together gives us a place or a way to keep an eye on things. And then the final section, Ben's going to cover nurturing our end users, building that community where they can help themselves. Those folks that maybe were the early power users in your company become the evangelists for the next group, and all that, you know, tied into a mentoring and a training strategy. As people get a license, perhaps you know, quiz them or assess them a little bit on how they how much experience they have, or how successful, you know, they might be in trying to build their own solutions. So we'll cover a lot, and that's why we've got 2.5 hours worth of content to share with you. So without further ado, I'll toss it over to you, Christina.
Okay, thank you, Adam. So let's move over here to strategy and vision. Okay, so as Adam was explaining about strategy and vision, we're looking at several different things here. So we are looking at the Center of Excellence. We're looking at that starter kit. We are looking at roles and responsibilities and the deployment strategy. And what we're doing here is we're trying to look at the big picture. And then we're going to take that big picture and we're going to detail this out into a plan that's efficient for our clients. So I'm going to go over some strategies that are client-based and provide some examples. So to start out the process, we're going to look at the deployment strategies, 3 areas. So first being the, let me move that slide over, the timeline and deliverables. And then we'll be looking at the goals and solutions, and we'll be looking at the implementation. So just to let you know, so a deployment strategy that we're looking at, it's the information that's collected will provide us with the information for the proper solution. So our clients are provided with tools and guidance to support establishing the Power Platform governance, and we're going to streamline their processes. And what we're going to do is try to add alerting, monitoring. We're looking at different types of automation that can be added, and also an all-encompassing better organization. So without further ado, we'll start with the timeline and deliverables. So move this. Okay, so the timeline and deliverables that we supply for clients starts out with discovery. So these are the discovery phase has several different areas that we're going to cover. Identify, there's assessments, and there's reviews, which I'll be going over in more detail. The second phase is the planning phase, where we're going over designing and prioritizing the goals that we have found and creating solutions for them. And from there, we were going to be looking at establishing governance, starting with version 1.0. From there, we're going to be looking at an implementation plan. We're going to be looking at creating processes and procedures. And we're also going to be looking at the how we are going to be presenting this to others that are working within the Power Platform, people that are operating the Power Platform. Then deploy is communicating and education. Now, with the deploy, this is also part of our nurturing as well. So communication can be taken at many different levels. So we're looking at us communicating out to our client. We're also looking at communication between power users. So we're looking at those app makers. We're identifying champions that can communicate. We're looking for looking at training, so it could be internal training, it could be external training in regards to creating apps, creating flows, working with Power Virtual Agent. There's a really great section on training in the day events that can be taken advantage of. But here is just like it's a zoomed out view of what entails in a project timeline and what we would provide on a regular basis. Now, just to be aware, since this is a zoomed out view, every corporation, every client is different. So these are just basic guidelines to follow, and it's more of like our default process. So depending on exactly what your Power Platform governance needs are, this could change. So there could be additions to the discovery, there could be additions to the planning phase, there could be additions to establishing more governance options, and then also deployment. With all 4 of these here, there is a lot of room to grow, and there's a lot of room for customizations. But this is basically our starting point. So we're going to start with the discovery phase, and what I'm going to show you here is exactly what identify, assessment, and review means, and then show you examples that we provide. So identify. So identify really means roles and responsibilities for administering the Power Platform. We're looking at the current roles, such as early adopters and makers. We're also looking to see who administers the Power Platform right now, or who would be the correct people, whether it be a team of people, whether it's just one or two people. If they have a very lean team, we might want to add more automation in. So by understanding the roles and responsibilities, we can get a really good bird's eye view, maybe even more detailed view of how we're going to set up our governance for the people that will be involved in it. Next would be our assessment. So the assessment is us looking at the current state. Oops, I apologize for that. Let's move on to the next slide so you can see discovery phase. So the assessment is we're looking at the current state of your Power Platform. So we're looking, and some of the ways to do that is with that Center of Excellence Starter Kit, which was mentioned previously. So we're going to be discussing that in more detail in the next slides. But with the Center of Excellence Starter Kit, it gives us that picture. It gives us the reporting to know, okay, where do you stand today with your Power Platform governance? What are your apps like? What's the usage like? Who are your makers? What are your environments like? Do you have security? So those are some of the things that we'll be looking at in detail. And then also within our discovery, we do sessions where we actually have like one-on-one sessions with groups to ask those important discovery questions. So then we start painting our picture. And from there, we start to build our goals, and we start to really identify those pain points. So things like the next option here, not option, is part of the bullets is reviewing. So we review your current technology, and when we go through that, we want to see what are you currently using and what are you currently doing right now. And this also could include reviewing things such as licensing. So depending on who your users are and makers, we want to see exactly what their technologies, what your technology standpoint is. And this can vary. So we're going to look at where the areas of improvements are in the technology side, and also look at those current pain points. And what we really want to do is look at those high risk issues first. So that's where we would prioritize. So what I want to do here is I'm going to show you an example of a discovery session. So in the discovery phase here, one example is looking at that business and technology alignment. And so the two things we're looking at are the Microsoft Center of Excellence Starter Kit and reporting. So I'll be looking at that in more detail. And then we're going to also review the Power Platform governance and goals in place right now. To go a little bit further, though, I do want to mention that this is the Microsoft Center of Excellence Starter Kit and reports. It's talking about the installation. So that we can assist in the monitoring and governance. So we're actually going to be going into some of those phases as well, and what we would offer. And then also on the governance goals side here, we're going to be talking about what Power Platform governance aims to do. So because we aim to enable business groups to focus on solving their business problems, and also complying with the IT compliance standards. So we're looking at the structure, the wants and needs, and bringing awareness to the capabilities that relate to Power Apps, Power Automate, and Power Virtual Agents. We want to see what can we take advantage of when we're creating these goals. Okay, so first we're going to talk about the Center of Excellence and some of the building blocks and the benefits. So first off, I get this question quite often: is why is the Center of Excellence important? Why do I need this? What's our reason? And I mean, I can just give you a definition of really what this truly means. It's a collection of components and tools that are designed to help you get started with our deployment strategy, and it's also about adopting and supporting the Power Platform, getting more involved in it. The Center of Excellence can be a powerful way for you to align with your business goals, and it's not a siloed way of doing things. It's a way of bringing individual departments together so that it's an all-encompassing program. So one of the first steps is that we want to foster the creativity and innovation across the organization. We want to empower these business units to really start using the program and taking advantage of some of the automation and taking away some of those manual processes that they're currently dealing with on a day-to-day basis with Power Apps and Power Automate. But we want to maintain a level of oversight and governance and make sure, as Adam says, put up those guardrails. So we're going to take a look at the different categories here. So starting with admin. Now, we want to gain insights into the Power Platform. As I was saying, this is a reporting tool that we'll be looking at. So this is going to be a way of getting a really detailed amount of analytics on, as I'd mentioned before, like app usage, risk assessment, licensing. So you can really just drive that strategy home on where you want to go with this program. There are personas listed here. We recommend that admins obviously would take care of the admin section. But as you see, as we go through the others, there are some slight differences. So with the governance, we open this up further. This is not just about admins running this section, but it's also about makers. So we're establishing an audit and compliance and archive processing. This includes a lot more than just compliance and archiving, but as an example, we can look at things like orphan apps, and we look at some more complex unused resources. So we're trying to take care of keeping the environments clean with apps that are being used, and trying to, as we're saying here, driving the discipline through the right communication. So we want to make sure that we govern and alert, we use alerts and monitoring properly, so that way we are not in the shadow IT area. We're actually making sure that everything is contained and organized properly within the Power Platform. Next, we would be going into nurturing, where we want to make sure that your Power Apps, your Power Platform community is being utilized properly. So like we're saying here, it's a thriving community. We want to make sure that everyone is following the best practices, that we know that our makers are working properly within our guidelines, and also sharing apps and making sure that we have some good governance and some consistency throughout our apps and Power Automate development. And this here we have admin makers, and end users, because we are going out to the community and the organization. All right, and the last is theming. So theming is going to be part of the nurture component, which we're going to go into in more detail. But we're going to be going over exactly how you can create themes and then share those out with the community. Okay, so our next is we're going to be talking about the Center of Excellence Starter Kit and reporting. So some of the things that we'll be looking at are importing the correct solutions. So how do we set this up? So we have the Starter Kit comes with several solutions already built out that you'll be installing. So first is the importing of the COE Starter Kit solutions. The main solutions are the core, the governance, and the nurture components. And the core components will start it's about syncing your resources into tables and building those admin apps where you get the visibility of the apps, the flows, and the makers in your existing environment. And governance is about app usage. I think I hear some static. It's about alerts and monitoring. And then next is looking at the nurture components, which we'll be going into further once we get into the nurture section of our presentation here. Another thing to make sure of is when you do install, we do have some items that we configure for you. And first off is the Power BI dashboard. So the Power BI dashboard, we show a little example here in the monitor, and this provides you with all of your tables and reporting for looking at the existing environments, apps, flows, makers, usage, and so on. And then we also look at audit logs, so we can get more usage information, which is also integrated into this. Later on, we're going to be talking about the additional apps that are included with the Center of Excellence that are outside this Power BI report, which includes app request information such as innovation backlog and maker assessments, and also looking at theming components. We do have the option also to extend the starter kit, which we do a lot with clients, where we take flows and apps that are already built, and we extend and create a customized solution that fits their organization. We also suggest that you install updates to the starter kit. It's usually monthly, but you can always get the latest version and look for the availability. Next, we're looking at the project intake goals discovery. So after we've got the Center of Excellence installed, then we can start looking at the different types of categories that have to be looked at further, such as types of apps, and we look at your environment setup. We look at Dataverse needs. So in the architecture side, this can vary, but after looking at the reports, you can kind of get a feel for what we have the most of and how things are currently running. And then we also look at security. So security is also monitored through the Power Platform Admin Center. So this is not within the Center of Excellence, but it is part of our program. We do look at connectors and on-prem gateways, security, and licensing. And then we look at alerts and actions. So this is where we're looking at the PowerShell commandlets when needed. And then we also look at various flows for connectors and environment management, and then also monitoring. And this can vary greatly, but as we mentioned before with monitoring, we're looking at basically app and flow, different app and flow assessments for orphan apps, archive apps, unused apps, and it goes on and on. Okay, so next we have the planning phase. Okay. So next is planning phase. So here we're looking at how we're going to be designing and prioritizing the goals that we have captured from our discovery sessions. So here we're going to talk about designing the future state and identifying the gaps in processes, and then defining policies and procedures and prioritizing that backlog. So what we'll look at is first an example of how we would start this planning phase. And so we would start here with, let me move this over. Our planning phase starting at 2.0, planning requirements and solutions. Also, I'm going to just do a time check here. Okay, it's 2:30. So application requests. So this is one of our samples of what a planning phase would be. And what we do here is we add the topic, we talk about the goal that we've recognized. And this one in particular is the application request process requires standardization consistent across the business. So this is something where the client is looking for some really good help on how to get this app request process started. They want to be able to monitor the apps that are coming into the Power Platform. And this is a way for them to avoid a lot of the shadow IT that could possibly happen. So this will help them control all apps coming into their system. So starting with overview, from the overview here, we're trying to define what the goal is and what we're looking to achieve. So this in essence is kind of like the description of the goal. And then from there, we're looking at the observation. So what do they have today? What is their current state? So we can take a look at how we're going to build out those requirements. So do they have an app process? Do they? Maybe not. But that's something that we would want to look further into. And then we would document that. From that documentation, we would go on to actually creating real requirements to build this out. So a typical requirement would be taking a persona and look at what they would be requesting and what is their pain point. So for instance, I am an admin and I want to make sure that I monitor my apps. How do I do that? So that would be basically a requirement saying I want to monitor my apps and having a persona along with it. From that information we captured from all three, overview, observation, and requirements, it gives us our solution. And every solution that we build out will be put into a backlog that we'll be talking about later. So for this particular solution, we're just showing one example. We start out with looking at workflows. Not every single solution is a workflow, but this one in particular is. So we're actually showing what an app request should look like. And these are standards. So depending on the organization, this could also vary and could be customized. But as a default, we want to look at the request. You want to see if the solution exists. We want to go through the process of whether what the priority is, looking at the architect and technology standards, reviewing security, reviewing resources, reviewing budget, and then also looking at the size and complexity. And then from what we're looking at here, we can make an assumption or make a good guess now, or just finalize that this would be either a regular Power App development, or it could be a circumstance where we have to put a full application lifecycle in place. So this would be one of those apps that would need full development. So solutions like this help us figure out where we should go. So the workflows are helpful. Sometimes our solutions are different if the goal is different. Say they would like to take a flow that already exists in the Center of Excellence and add to it. So that would still be part of the solutions, but it would be a different type of solution. We would go in to do Power Automate development to add those customizations. I want to have orphan apps that are from 2015 to 2021. Give me a list and let's see what we can do about it. So it could be a numerous amount of things. But this is a way for us to basically generate a full backlog of solutions and then prioritize by the highest risk issues. So moving along. Next, we're going to be talking about establishing governance 1.0. And in governance 1.0, we're talking about implementation, as I mentioned, of the high risk issues from the backlog. We're talking about putting together processes and procedures, and then we're talking about presenting to communicate the program. So as an example, we'll show here is establishing governance of version 1.0. So here we're talking about the prioritized implementation. This is our backlog. So from the backlog here, I'm going to show you an example of how this works. So as you saw in the previous slides, we talked about the goals here. And so what we've taken is every goal we've added in as a description, and then we've categorized it. So there's many different categories to the Power Platform governance, and one being the data loss prevention policies and connectors, archive apps and flows, different types of monitoring, app requests are all listed. And what we do is we add in, this is a high level backlog, we add in what each goal is, we put the priority into it, and then we add the hours. And the hours will vary depending on customizations that are needed. Some are flows that can just be turned on that Center of Excellence has provided, and others are a little bit more complex. There's also some where the solution could be a combination of a Power App, Power Automate, and Power BI. So we've had some situations like that where there's numerous different types of apps that are kind of intermingled. And it's always good to understand that when these kind of apps are built, that we have the correct licensing for it too. So we do give a briefing on licensing to help clients understand when they're building these apps what it would take on that side for access purposes. The next, we're going to be talking about the deploy phase. So here we're mentioning communication and education. So what we're trying to do in the communication side of things is making sure that we are communicating to our makers, we are communicating to our users, we are communicating to our executives. Communication on a new Power Platform governance can span company-wide. And what we can do is put up different plans in place for the different types of audiences, groups that you'll be dealing with. So if you have to have a presentation with high level, a supervisor, executive, there's presentations for that. If you're looking to just train makers or communicate to makers some of the new processes that are in place, there are presentations for that. We do provide education, so we can do education on by role, by team that are operating the Power Platform. And then we can also identify power users that would like to take on the role of training and educating, communicating out. which we're going to be learning about further along in this presentation too. And that also, this brings along the line of the nurturing community side of things. So as I was saying before, we want to make sure that we look at this as part of that communication tool. And last but not least, besides the training and walkthroughs that I mentioned earlier, we also want to make sure that we have the correct documentation. So if the situation calls for more than just training, so we're going to give you the keys. You know, you've finished our program with us, and you're ready to take this to the next level and independently work on it. We have how-to documentation that you can use, service guidelines, governance documentation, but it's customized for your company needs, because not every company is the same when it comes to some of the rules and guidance that they're going to need. This can be something that could be shared within a company-wide community. Also with solutions, and we do the training and walkthroughs, as I mentioned before. There's also I think do we have some stuff? No, we don't have anything in the chat here. Training and walkthroughs, when we're talking about that, there are a couple different tools. Some examples are like innovation backlog. We've had some clients interested in that. And so what we would do is we walk them through different apps that are available. And you're going to see that in the demos later on. So the walkthroughs can be for that, or a walkthrough can be for the Center of Excellence, but just training to understand the Power Platform operational apps that can be used, and reporting. And solution envisioning workshops, this is something where we take something that's existing, like the extending the starter kit, and we look at what you have today, and we do envisioning workshops for anything additional that was maybe outside of your goals, where you just need more guidance on your side that you would be developing, but we would be providing that hand of guidance. Okay, so now we're nearing the end and getting ready for the next section. But if is there any questions on this section before I move on? I'm just going to give you a quick summary. So I'll just
actually
go through.
I saw. Sorry, Christina, to interrupt.
Yeah.
I just saw Bill had posted a question in the chat. And Bill was asking if there's a tool that either Microsoft has or that we'd recommend for storing automation ideas. He adds one that could embed ROI numbers, you know, hours spent manually, cost avoidance savings, development licensing, etc. I'm wondering, Ben, if one of the components, so Ben is going to show, Christina here is talking about kind of the core of the starter kit that Microsoft's developed, but there's additional components to it. One of them is the innovation backlog. And Ben, I'm wondering if some of that could be leveraged, and we could just kind of wait maybe for your demo and then kind of circle back.
Absolutely right, Adam. That is that's something that is part of the innovation backlog, and we'll certainly be covering that a little later on in the presentation.
All right, perfect. Yeah, so Bill, let's wait for Ben's demo, and then if that doesn't answer your question fully, definitely circle back.
Sounds good. Thank you.
And that's absolutely correct. That is a definitely innovation backlog question. Also possibly maker assessment if once Ben goes through that. Okay, so in summary, we looked at the definition of Power Platform Governance Deployment Strategy. We looked at defining that, the 4 stages of project timelines, and you know, getting that bird's eye view, and then setting up that Center of Excellence starter kit and establishing, communicating Power Platform Governance version 1.0. So without further ado, unless there's any further questions, I will be handing this off to Eden for administration and governance. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much for that, Christina. That was incredibly helpful, and I hope everyone enjoyed that part of our session for today. And okay, I guess we can go ahead and move forward with administration and governance. So before we talk a little bit about administration and governance, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of our accessibility capabilities. So as you guys might have noticed, we do have some of those capabilities turned on during the session. It is something that needs to be toggled on. So if for some reason you're not able to see it, that's most likely why. And the reason why I wanted to include this very quickly in our discussion, because we have a lot of capabilities that we are leveraging in today's session that is essentially creating a better experience for everyone, right? Because accessibility essentially means different things to different people. Sometimes when we think about accessibility, we think about designing buildings and structures, right? But there are some other components of accessibility where we here at Microsoft are trying to create experiences that are essentially better for everyone. So the reasons why you'll see things like the live caption on is because we want to be able to make sure that we are providing those capabilities for everyone. Not all disabilities are visible, right? And so we want to make sure that what we're doing here is we're making it so that it's an all-inclusive session for today. So, what does that specifically mean? Well, it means that we are providing capabilities here that are not just for those who might have a specific type of disability. So it could be something around vision, providing accessibility tools for blind, colorblind, low vision, as well as hearing, right? So those who are hard of hearing, or they might have hearing loss, or perhaps, there are specific features that might help with things like closed captioning that can help with those folks. And then from a neurodiversity perspective, we also have dictation and hello sign-in that can essentially make it more accessible for those who have things like autism or seizures or other cognitive disabilities. And then from a mobility perspective, sometimes there are some of our products that are going to be more easier for specific folks that might have specific types of injuries or arthritis or what have you. Essentially, a way to be able to have them navigate some of the this digital world essentially in some non-traditional ways. So that's why you'll see that some of these capabilities are turned on for our session today. And the reason for that is because, believe it or not, there's 1 billion people in the world who have disabilities. And they're going to need some assistive technology, right? So essentially, what we're trying to do is provide accessible technology so that everyone can participate in sessions like today. And so one of the things that we mentioned earlier is that with Teams, we do have the ability to offer things like live captioning. So, for example, I have live captioning turned on my session for today. And basically what that allows me to do is be able to basically show all of the transcriptions on the bottom of my screen. I also have the ability to leverage one of our capabilities, which is, transcriptions. So the transcriptions, if you start it, it essentially shows up on the right hand of the team session, and it will transcribe everything that is discussed during the session. So one of the other things that I wanted to highlight is that in PowerPoint, we also offer subtitles. This is actually one of my favorite capabilities of PowerPoint. Every time I have PowerPoint turned on and the captionings are on, everyone's like, wow, what is that? What is that I'm looking at, right? So essentially, this allows me to be able to present subtitles that will display live directly within the PowerPoint presentation. I can leverage it for, I think there's about 10 supported speech languages and subtitles for, I think, about 60 plus written languages. So it's really, it's really nice to be able to provide that capability for those who might be hard of hearing, or they might be, speak another language. So having those subtitles makes it easier to understand. And one of the other things that we can do with a lot of the presentations, as well as our PCs, is be able to do things like use our PC without a display. We do have a narrator that allows for audio descriptions. We do have the ability to see what's on the screen. with a magnifier. You can also use a high contrast mode. We also have the ability to, to change a pointer size or use some of the keyboard capabilities like turning on sticky keys and what have you. So this essentially is making it, your PC essentially more accessible. And then we have, finally we're getting to something that's more PowerPoint or Power Apps related, but essentially we have Canvas Apps Accessibility Checker. And essentially what that means is that when those folks out there that are creating a Power App, if you take a look here, we've got a stethoscope. And if you click on that stethoscope, you can essentially use what we call our accessibility checker to see if your Power App is accessible. If there are any things that you can do to change your Power App to make it more accessible for your users prior to launch. So this is one of the new capabilities that we've introduced that makes Power Apps more accessible for all of our users of the Power Platform. Okay, so I guess now we can probably go ahead and jump into governance and security. This is obviously one of my favorite things to talk about. I've talked about it quite a bit. I think I've had probably about 30 or 40 presentations on this very topic just in the last few months. So as you can see, it's a really big area of interest for our customers. And the reason for that is because, our customers are recognizing the value of Power Platform, right? There are a lot of folks that are going out there, they're creating Power Apps, they're creating flows, they're using Power Automate Desktop to create, robotic process automations. But then, we've got our IT teams and our security teams that are like, wait a minute, wait. I need to figure out how to govern this, right? Like, what do I do to make sure that we have the guardrails in place so that all their business users or clinicians or whomever can go ahead and start innovating, can go ahead and take a manual process, digitize it, automate it, and so on and so forth. So, as you guys have heard today, there are some capabilities that are out of the box. There are some capabilities that are part of the Power Platform Admin Center. And then we also have some capabilities that are part of that starter kit that we've been talking about, right? So the starter kit, I think, as Christina mentioned earlier today, is just one building block of a whole solution, right? It's one piece of a bigger puzzle. And Tallan is here today to talk about the bigger puzzle, right? But we today, moving forward for the next hour or so, are going to be talking about those various different capabilities that you can get as part of the Center of Excellence or as part of Power Platform Admin Center, and what you can leverage with the platform and with the Center of Excellence Starter Kit. So, as far as the Power Platform goes, one of the biggest questions that I know I get is, well, I want to understand what's out there. Who's created what? How have they created it? What are they doing with it? Are they using custom connectors? And that's where the Center of Excellence Starter Kit is a great tool, right? Because we offer a Power BI report. And this Power BI report that's part of the toolkit essentially shows you anything and everything that is being leveraged with the platform. So all of the Power Apps that are out there, all of the flows that have been created, who the creators are, how many sessions there have been run, how many flows have been run. And, there's essentially, a list of even where these apps are being leveraged or where these makers are in the globe. So you can essentially get a really good perspective on how the platform is being used in the organization. So it does require a little bit of legwork, right? So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to actually stop presenting and I'm going to jump into just a quick demo to show you guys. Just a quick demo to show you guys the type of information that you can leverage. So if you see here right now, I am in a Power BI report. This actually comes from the Center of Excellence Starter Kit. So if you download that Starter Kit, and you install it onto your workstation or what have you, and you get all the flows and apps that are up and running that are required to get this report updated, essentially what happens is you get this really nice dashboard. This dashboard essentially has everything, right? You've got overview of Power Apps, overview of Power Automate, chatbots, custom connectors. So for example, if I go in, I can see here a list of all the different environments that have been created. And we'll talk a little bit more about what environments are and what you can do with environments. But essentially, I also have a list of all of my apps that have been created and cloud flows. I also have, a list of the Teams environments. This is something that always comes up as well. Who's creating Power Apps in Teams? For example, I can see all of the environments, who the owners are, how many times they've run an app or a flow. You can also see, some information around custom connectors, so the custom connectors that are out there, where they're hosted, who are the ones that have created the custom connectors. I can also see some information around desktop flows. So this essentially shows me how many desktop flows have been run, who they've been run by, and so on. So this essentially is giving you a glimpse, into how the platform is being leveraged. And of course, that's incredibly important for a lot of our customers who are interested in getting understanding of how the platform is being leveraged. Okay, so moving back to my deck here, just a moment while this opens. And I am going to go ahead and resume. Okay, so hopefully that gives everyone perspective into the Power BI report and the type of information you can get when you're leveraging the Power BI report from the starter kit and how it can provide you a lot of visibility into how the Power Apps and flows and what have you have been created. So the next piece of the puzzle is really, knowing the different types of environments that are out there, as well as the different types of security roles. So if we look at the security roles, there are some organizational admin roles that are really important to know. And the reason for this is because a lot of the administration from a Power Platform perspective happens in the Power Platform Admin Center. So the Power Platform Admin Center is very similar to some of the other admin centers that you might have worked with, like a Teams admin center or what have you. But essentially, this is where you'll see all of the different environments. You'll see, all of the different resources and how they're being leveraged. You can assign security roles, and we'll dive into that in just a moment. But if you notice here, a global admin generally has full administration to all services in the tenant. So if someone has global admin rights, they're most likely going to be able to access the Power Platform Admin Center. There have been a couple of instances where that wasn't always the case, but generally the global admin will have Power Platform admin rights. But there are also a couple of other roles. So the Power Platform admin, there is an admin role specifically for that. There is also an admin role that's for Dynamics 365. So if a user has a Dynamics 365 admin role, they will also have admin role for Power Platform Admin Center. And then there's the delegated admin. So for those of you folks who might have a partner that is providing support to your organization, the delegated admin role can also be leveraged to see all of the services in a tenant and to see how the different environments are created and so on and so forth. So the next thing is well, what exactly are environments, right? So environments it generally starts off with an Azure AD tenant. So when you have your Azure AD tenant, you can create environments within that tenant. And so there's one that comes out of the box. It's called default. And that is, I like to say, in some ways, it's kind of a free-for-all, right? Because essentially anyone who is in the default environment can have the ability to create additional environments. They can have the ability to use different types of connectors unless if those things have been locked down. But the default environment is not locked down out of the box. So it does require a little bit of work to get that locked down. One of the things that we generally like to add is that the default environment is really great if you change it to a personal productivity and make it so that your users can play with Power Apps. Maybe they want to use something for their own personal purposes. They can use that that environment, that default environment for those types of things. But we generally recommend you have an environment for development, one for testing, and one for production. And then that default environment be used for personal productivity. Now, I have some customers who have one environment for production for the whole enterprise. Then I have some customers who've broken it down a little bit further, and they have a development, a test, and a production environment for each business unit. So maybe one for HR, maybe one for finance, and one for other parts of the organization that might need to have their own environments for various purposes. So some of the key facts that are important to know about environments is that the environments are essentially geographically located based on where your Azure AD tenant is. So the first person who uses Power Apps in a specific region closest to the Azure AD tenant is where you will have your Power Apps configured. Your Power Apps environment configured for. There's also a couple of other things that are important to note. The default environment does, again, provide access to all users. So for those of you folks who do have a default environment and using it for production purposes, it might be something you might want to consider perhaps changing. And when you create a new environment, it gives you the ability to have a little bit more control around permissions for that environment. And so, one thing that I like to show is what does it mean to what do environments specifically mean, and how does that look in the overall grand scheme of things? So if you take a look at this description here, you'll notice that I've got my I've got Microsoft Azure. And then I also have my Power Apps default environment. The Power Apps default environment allows me to be able to, for example, connect to SharePoint. So if I create a Power App from SharePoint, it actually puts that automatically in the default environment. But I also have the ability to connect to things like Teams, Exchange, Excel, and so on. If I want to be able to access something that's on-premise, it requires an on-premise data gateway. That on-premise data gateway is actually a virtual machine, and it's a virtual machine that essentially is going to act as a gateway that then connects to Azure, which then connects to your Power Apps environment. So you're essentially creating a tunnel from the on-premise data gateway to Azure to the Power Apps environment. This gives you the ability to access a database that's on-prem. It gives you the ability to access a SharePoint server that's on-prem, any type of file storage, and so on. You also have the ability to use a lot of the Azure functions when you're leveraging Power Apps. So logic apps, if there are any APIs that you create, any custom APIs, any additional functions or storage that also you can connect to using Power Apps. And then one other key thing here that I want to make note of is that one Dataverse database equals one environment. So you can't have multiple Dataverse databases in an environment. It's one-to-one. And when you do create things like model-driven Power Apps, if you make changes to tables or columns in Dataverse, all of that is sitting in Dataverse in an environment. That also includes any process flows, any security roles that you create. That all sits in Dataverse, which is then in the environment. So hopefully that gives an overall picture into how the platform is essentially being used. So yes, environments do actually live in your Azure tenant. So it's Azure tenant and then the environments, which is why you have to have some type of Azure AD credentials, for example, to be able to access Power Apps, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. So we've talked a little bit about the 5 layers of security. So we'll actually just start up to talk about the 5 layers of security. So I think that kind of leads into the question that just came up about tenants. So the way that we look at securing the platform is a couple of different ways. And it also depends on whether you're using Dataverse. So if we think about it, you have security from your tenant level, right? So if you are familiar with conditional access policies, that's one way that you can secure the Power Platform. We also can secure Power Platform through what we call the environment level. So the environment level essentially gives users the ability to access permissions within an environment. Like we have things like Environment Maker and so on. We also have resource permissions. So resource permissions essentially would be like who is the owner of a Power App or a flow, who's the user of a Power App. You can essentially define resource permissions for the Power Apps or flows or what have you. And then Dataverse has its own set of security roles. So when you're using Dataverse, you're essentially using that security role, and that security role precedes everything else. So whenever you're using Dataverse, that comes with its own set of security roles that need to be enabled. And when they are enabled, they precede everything else. So it is going to use whatever is the most secure of the platform, but essentially Dataverse has its own security roles as well. And then we have one other layer of security here that's around cross-tenant. So some customers that I work with have subsidiaries, right? And each subsidiary has its own tenant, right? And let's say you've got a user who needs to be able to access a connector from another tenant and pull information into a Power App. You have the ability to restrict inbound and outbound connectors across tenant. So that is a capability as well that is part of the platform that allows you to be able to have an additional layer of security. So this is one common question that I get is, well, I don't want to give my users access to data that I don't want them to have access to. And the way that Power Apps is designed is that you're not providing your users with any access to data that they don't already have access to. So the way that we say is that your users should only have access to data sources that they really require access to. So there essentially is, when you're logging into a Power App, the next step of it is it's asking you to log into that data source. So if that user doesn't have access to that data source, they're not going to be able to get access to the data. So with regard to conditional access policies. So for those of you who are not familiar, essentially if you're using Azure AD Premium, I think this requires a P1 SKU. It essentially allows you to be able to grant or block access. So you can grant access to Power Apps, but you can also block it by users, by groups, by device, as well as by location. So essentially, you can use your conditional access policies to be able to grant access. And it does also work with, multiple authentication protocols. So OAuth 2, for example, you can also leverage with the Power Platform. So a couple of other things that you can do is you can also, limit access based on groups. So you can perhaps, give access to only specific groups, the ability to share an app to a specific group or what have you. And then from an external user's perspective, generally Power Platform is being used for internal purposes. There are some capabilities that you can leverage where perhaps if you had like an Azure AD B2B, so like business to business, you have the ability to create the ability to collaborate with external users that way. But most of the time when someone is using a Power App that they're planning on sharing externally, it's done through what we call Power Apps portals. And Power Apps portals has a couple of different ways of authenticating. It's either through local authentication or you can use Azure B2C. So for example, they can log in with like their LinkedIn credentials, or if they have like, if they still have a Hotmail account or some kind of Microsoft account, they have the ability to access using one of those external sources of authentication. So when we're thinking about environment, security, and access control, one of the things that I think I mentioned earlier is that you have when you're using the Dataverse capabilities, which by the way, Dataverse was called Common Data Service. We like to change names around here at Microsoft, so it's gone through a couple of name changes. I think we called it DataFlex for a while. So we've gone through a couple of different name changes, but sometimes you'll see it's still referred to as Common Data Service. But essentially, Common Data Service is what is now Dataverse. We also have a Dataverse for Teams, not to confuse you. But essentially, the Dataverse security rules supersede everything else. So we've got, from an environment perspective, we've got the maker role, we've got environment maker, we've got environment admin, we've got resource permissions. So resource permissions to be able to access an app, a flow, and so on. But once a common data service or Dataverse database has been created, that security role takes over for all the other types of roles that are out there. We're always going to use the role that's going to be the most secure. So that's the way we generally think of it. So if we're going to think about the out-of-box security roles, these are some of the ones that are really key to know. We've got our environment admin role, and then we also have a system admin role. Environment admin is for when you are using when you're not using Dataverse. When you're using Dataverse, it's system administrator. So that gives you the ability to completely administer an environment. If you're using system administrator, it gives you the ability to make changes to the Dataverse database. And these roles cannot be modified. So we also do not encourage you to modify them. You always have the ability to go and create a new security role. So if you go into your Power Platform Admin Center and you wanted to go and make a change to a security role, you have the ability to do so there. You don't necessarily need to go in and create or modify a specific role that's out of the box. The other one that's really important here is the environment maker. And the environment maker essentially allows you to be able to create a new environment, but it also allows you to be able to create resources for that environment. So for example, if you wanted to create like a custom connector to connect to an environment, if you wanted to add any other specific gateways or what have you, the environment maker essentially has the ability to leverage that. And then our Dataverse user essentially is a basic user role, so nothing too sophisticated there. It essentially allows you to be able to go in and leverage some of the platform and so on. So just very quickly, if I stop presenting and move over to a quick demonstration, I can show you guys what that looks like. So if you see here, I've got my Power Platform Admin Center. So I need to have a Power Platform admin rights to be able to access this. This is essentially showing me a list of all the different environments that I have. So for example, you'll see here I've got some that are called Microsoft Teams. I've got some that are production, some that are developer, and I've also got that default, right? So if you'll take a look here, by the way, the Teams environments are essentially anytime someone creates a Power App or a flow, using Power Apps for Teams, what it does is it automatically creates an environment. And that's so that the only users that are part of that team are the ones that are going to access that app or that flow or virtual agent in that environment. So that's what the Microsoft Teams environments are. You'll also notice that, I've got some other ones here that are production, developer, sandbox, and so on. But let's say if I clicked on this one right here, this essentially is showing me my default environment. If I want to, I can take a look at all the different security roles that are available for this specific environment. So for example, here, you'll see I've got all these different roles that are created. If I wanted to, I can create a new role. Or if I want to perhaps assign someone to a role, what I would do is I would select this. And then you'll see here, these are all the different folks that are part of this role right here. I can always add other folks to act as a system administrator for that environment. So as you can see here, this is how you can essentially go in and assign different types of roles. This is essentially where you would also go and create a new role. And if you create a new role, essentially, it can get very, very granular in terms of the type of access rights that you provide. Fortunately, this always just takes a minute for it to populate, so we can just go back to our presentation. So just a moment. Let me go back to the presenter mode here. Okay. So moving on here, let's talk a little bit about data loss prevention policies. So this is a hot topic, right? Because everyone's like, well, you guys have so many connectors, but how do I go and block those connectors? Or what do I do to limit access between the different types of connectors? So data loss prevention policies are essentially accessed through the Power Platform Admin Center. So that screen that we were just at, if you go a little bit further down, essentially it gives you the ability to go in and create a new data policy if you'd like. And so when you're creating a data policy, it gives you the ability to say which connectors can be leveraged together. So for example, I can say I want my Azure AD connector to work with my Office 365 users connector. I can also say whether I want to be able to use those specific connectors for business data only, or if I want to use it for non-business data, or if I want to block it altogether. So those are the different ways that you can essentially classify a connector. It could either be business data, no business data, or blocked. You also have the ability to group, specific connectors so that they're all used for a specific, for a specific app or for a specific flow. And by the way, you have the ability to define which policies are going to be applied for which environments. So for example, a tenant admin can essentially say that in these environments, these connectors are okay to be used, but in this environment, they're not. So when you're creating a data loss prevention policy, you have the ability to do that. So generally, when we're thinking about connectors, we've got, the business aspect, we've got the non-business aspect, and the blocked aspect. So essentially, you have the ability to decide which one is going to be leveraged for which. And from what I'm hearing is that there will be additional capability coming soon that allow you to be able to say, what specific parts of the connector you want to provide access to and what you don't want to. So that is, from what I'm hearing, that is soon to come. But essentially, a business connector gives you the ability to provide connectors, the use of connectors from, like one or more connector, essentially from a business group. You can essentially define which connectors that is. And then the same thing for non-business, and then essentially the same thing for blocked. So for example, if I switch over here really quickly and go into my demonstration, so for example, if you see here, I've got my data policies open. If I go in and I hit next, I can go in and say like test, right? So then you'll see I've got all of the different connectors listed here. So these are automatically in non-business unless if you go in and you actually move it over to business or blocked. So for example, I can go in and I can say I want Adobe Sign and for example, Azure AD to move to business, or I can say move to blocked. So let's just say if I move to business, and then once I do that, if I go hit next, I have the ability to add to all environments. I have the ability to add to multiple environments. I also have the ability to exclude environments. So let's say if I went in and I hit add to multiple environments, I say next, and then here I can choose which environments I want to add to that policy. So for example, here I can see the Center of Excellence environment. I'm going to say add to policy. And then when I hit next, it's going to give me the ability to review the policy I've created. And once I go ahead and create it, that'll create it. On the good side, I also have the ability to edit it. So if there's a policy I've created and I need to make changes to it, I also have the ability to go back and make changes to the policy. So
I hate to interrupt. There's a question in the chat. Just about the best and easiest way to give end users a security role in bulk.
Yeah, so there are some automation capabilities that you can leverage to, just a moment here, that you can leverage to be able to assign roles. From what I understand, like some of the groups are still not able, but I believe there is a PowerShell commandlet. So perhaps towards the end of the session, once I'm done with my session, I'll take a look and see if I can find it and post it in the questions or in the chat. But I do know that there is a PowerShell commandlet that would allow you to be able to do that in bulk. You know, there is a capability that's part of Power Automate Desktop. I don't know if the folks here have been leveraging it or not, but there's a lot you can do with Power Automate Desktop. It's not really intended for collaboration. The Windows 10 version is essentially free for all users. You have a lot of capabilities to leverage with Power Automate Desktop, certain things that you might want to automate that we might not necessarily have a tool out of the box for. The Windows 10 Power Automate Desktop capability essentially allows you to be able to do it. There's a ton of capabilities, like you can run PowerShell commandlets. There's all kinds of different actions. So I would also encourage everyone to take a look at the Power Automate Desktop for Windows 10 capabilities as well for any type of automation or anything that you're trying to do in bulk that's a tedious or remedial type of task. It makes it really easy to automate. So, but I will definitely take a look and see if I can find that commandlet for you guys and throw it in the chat. So if there's no other questions, we could probably continue to move forward here. So one of the things that I wanted to make mention is that when you have a new connector, right? So if you have a new connector that's been created, and if it's created, you know, after a DLP policy has been created, it's automatically going to get added to the default connector group that's identified for that connector. So you can essentially set a default connector group, and so that anytime, you know, a new connector essentially gets created, it can go into like a business or non-business or blocked. And then essentially an admin has the ability to go in and review the connectors and then classify, you know, whether they should be in business or non-business. So there is a new connector default that's just been added. And then from a DLP policy, essentially we have a couple of different types of DLP policies. You can have a tenant level DLP policy. You can also have an environment level DLP policy. So for example, a tenant level DLP policy is something that can only be done by a Power Platform admin. So if you're a Power Platform admin, you can essentially create a DLP policy that is at the tenant level. When you are an environment admin or you only have like an environment admin role, you can essentially create a DLP policy specifically for environments, just not across tenant. So another thing that I wanted to add is that you essentially, from a tenant perspective goes, you have the ability to apply policies to all environments. You have the ability to apply to to selected environments. You also have the ability to apply to only specific environments. As an environment admin, you can only add a policy to one environment at a time. And essentially, let me actually just skip through this one because I think we talked about it. I think I'm going to skip over to the DLP management capabilities. So from a DLP management capability standpoint, we've got a couple of different ways that you can manage data loss prevention policies. So one of them is in the Power Platform, is under Power Platform, and it's done through the Admin Center. So that was the one that I specifically showed you guys just a couple of minutes ago. But you also do have the ability to use the Power Platform Admins connector. So for those of you folks who have installed the Center of Excellence Starter Kit, you might be familiar with that connector because it's a requirement to get that one installed. But that does give you the ability to be able to manage the various connectors that are being leveraged through a DLP policy. But we also have the ability to do some automations and what have you using the PowerShell interface. So if you wanted to, you can essentially use some of the PowerShell capabilities to be able to automate any type of DLP functions if you were interested, especially custom connectors. So you have the ability to do that as well. So I think we talked a little bit about how to create policies and essentially, so let's move over to monitoring and alerts. Okay, so from a monitoring and alerts perspective, we've got a couple of different ways to be able to monitor the platform, right? So earlier on in the session, we took a quick glimpse into the starter kit and the Power BI report that you can leverage there. We also do have some insights that you can leverage through the Power Platform Admin Center. So the Power Platform Admin Center essentially, let me actually just flip over to a different screen and show you guys what you can leverage there. So this is the Power Platform Admin Center, right? You can essentially see all the different environments here. If I go to Analytics, I can see how Dataverse is being leveraged in my organization, you know, how many users there are, how many API calls there have been. It does get a little bit more granular. If you take a look here, these are all the different types of information that's available to me out of the box. From a Power Automate perspective, I can also see, you know, how many runs have been made, the type of overall usage. I can see things like error. I can also go in and see some of that type of information regarding Power Apps. So for example, I can see the overall usage. I can see if there's any, if there, you know, what locations the Power Apps have been leveraged. I can also see any errors that have come up. I can also see things like service performance. And by the way, we're constantly adding to this. So prior to, I think a lot of these reports are actually relatively new. They weren't always there. Now this right here is the capacity. So here, if you notice, I can see what the storage capacity looks like. So the more Power Apps licenses you have, you're going to see more storage here. But essentially, for example, it shows overall how much I have available. I can see what's been used from a database perspective. I can also see what's being used between a file and a log perspective. So database would be like Dataverse. File would be like perhaps media or other things that you're adding to your Power Apps. So those are the types of things that would be considered under as file. I can also see essentially like all of my different Dataverse capacities. So these are all the different environments. I can see how much data usage they all have. I can see how much file usage they have. From a Microsoft Teams perspective, it's a similar thing. Here I can see all of the different environments that have been created and how often they're being used. And then here I also can see all of my add-ons. So I have, you know, if I had additional licenses that were added on, I can see them here. I can see some information regarding trial environments here as well. If I have any Power Apps that are associated with Dynamics, this is essentially where they're listed. If I'm using portals, I also have the ability to see how portals is being leveraged across my environments here. I'm actually surprised that there are some portals here, but as you can see, there's a couple that are in here. So that shows the portals. The data integration essentially allows me to be able to see things like, you know, how many project runs there have been. I also have this data preview, which is actually really nice for those that are using on-premise data gateways. This essentially shows me a list of all the different gateways that are being leveraged, who they're being leveraged by, and how many gateways they have associated with their accounts. And then that pretty much sums it up. This data policies, I think we already saw, and then this essentially takes us to the Power BI Admin Center. So those are some of the reports or what have you that are essentially out of the box. So again, this Center of Excellence report is what you can leverage if you install the Center of Excellence Starter Kit. So you'll also be able to access that from there. So moving on to back to the PowerPoint presentation, if you could just bear with me. I'm going to jump over to that. And okay, so we had a chance to see, you know, the different types of analytics that are available out of the box. One of the other things that you can also get access to is audit logs. And so Office 365, if you guys are familiar with the Security Center, there is the ability to be able to turn on audit logs. It's something that's also required for the Center of Excellence Starter Kit. But that audit log essentially shows you a lot of detail about how Flow is used, how Power Apps is used, how Power Virtual Agents is used, and so on. So for example, here you'll see it says, you know, anytime someone creates a flow, anytime someone edits a flow, anytime someone deletes a flow, and similar to Power Apps, right? So anytime a flow or app is created or published or what have you, it tracks all of those activities and it puts it into a log that's in the Security Center. Now, you also have the ability to create flows, which is what our starter kit has. It has flows that basically grabs information from those activity logs and it dumps it into that Power BI report that you guys just saw. So, you know, you have a variety of different connectors as well that are available. There's the Power Automate Management Connector, Power Platform for admins, Power Apps for admins or app makers. These are all different types of connectors that essentially give you full visibility into the different connectors and how they're being leveraged and what have you. We also do have, you know, some PowerShell capabilities that allow you to be able to capture information that might not be available in the Center of Excellence report or might not be available out of the box, but you do have the ability to run some PowerShell commandlets to get some additional information as well. And so, you know, like that report that I was showing you guys just a second ago, essentially what that does is it's basically a cross-tenant dashboard. So it can be used to capture all of that O365 data is basically what we call it. So it's essentially an Office 365 management API that you're leveraging. And that essentially allows you to be able to pull that activity log and put it into this Power BI report. And you have the ability to, you know, to build flows. So if there are any specific audit events that you want to get alerted on, you have the ability to essentially create a flow that will be able to pull that information using it's basically the graph security connector. But essentially what that does is it gives you the ability to create alerts and maybe get like emails or what have you anytime a specific activity occurs. But, you know, for those of you who are interested in learning more about the different types of PowerShell connectors that are out there, these are the scripts that you can essentially leverage to be able to pull additional activity from your tenant. We do have you know, all kinds of other capabilities that you can leverage. We do have quite a few different types of connectors that are out there. So I'll be sure to provide these resources for you to take home. If you wanted to take a quick screenshot of this specific screen, it gives you access to the white paper, COE guidance, a list of the PowerShell commandlets, the management connectors and what they do, the different ways that you can get activity logging, and so on and so forth. So I hope this was helpful, folks. I really do appreciate your time today. If you have any questions, feel free to throw them into the chat, or if you're able to come off of mute, more than happy to take those questions now. Otherwise, I'm going to pass the torch over to Christina, who's going to talk a little bit more about roles and responsibilities. Okay. Thank you so much, guys. I will go ahead and stop presenting then, and I will pass the torch over to Christina. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Eden. Okay, great. So we're going to be speaking about roles and responsibilities and path forward. Oh, it looks like we have a question. Eden, do you want to take this before I begin?
Yes, sure. So we do have some prereqs that are out there. Let me see if actually I can throw them into the chat. There's actually quite a few prereqs to get the Center of Excellence up and running. Let me see what the specific storage requirements are. It definitely does require some storage. So if you notice that you're out of capacity, it most likely means that you need to purchase some licensing to get the Center of Excellence installed. But I will, I'll throw a link that shows the different requirements into the chat here. And by the way, if you are looking to set up a COE, the core components, essentially, the core components in the audit log takes about 2.5 hours.
Okay. Thank you, Eden.
Absolutely.
All right. So we're going to be talking about roles and responsibilities and our path forward. So the first thing we're going to be looking at is roles and responsibilities of who is responsible for the Power Platform governance, operations, makers, users, development teams. So there's a really big list of people that can be involved in this. And then afterwards, we're going to be taking a look at our path forward. So we're looking at application development and technical support. So we are going to be talking a little bit more about that backlog that I mentioned earlier. And then we're also going to be talking about the documentation that we provide to clients. We're also going to be looking a little bit further deeper into the app request process. I did show a sample of it earlier, but we're just going to be looking at this for guidance and training and also for maintenance and monitoring. And then I'm briefly going to be going over the maker assessment and innovation backlog, which Ben will be demoing next. So we'll start with the roles and responsibilities. So next slide. Okay, so who are we talking about? So these are the typical roles that are involved in the Power Platform governance, but I'm going to expand on this. So the roles that are defined here are Power App and Flow makers, application lifecycle management, DevOps users, IT department data protection officers, and support and training engineers. But let's dive a little bit deeper in this. So we have the Power App and Flow makers. Now, it says here that anyone can create an app or flow for personal productivity, but there are apps and flows that need to be created for business purposes. Sometimes they can be critical. Sometimes they need to be shared across the organization. So a Power and Flow, a maker, basically, we call them an app maker, essentially has that capability with the correct licensing. Now, in this bucket, there can also be other circumstances where, say, the power of development is very minimal, and say we're actually working with people that are not able to build Power Apps, but yet they would like a Power App built. So these people are called requesters. So there are people out there that work in different departments that have manual processes. They don't want to build themselves, so they would actually request to have an app built. And that's when these other apps like Innovation Backlog and Maker Assessment will come into play. But for those people, they are looking to provision their own app, but yet not have the responsibility of development. So next thing we want to mention is, this is going to go into the next level of roles and responsibilities, is the application lifecycle management and DevOps users. So say you're not building a basic Power App, say this requires a full application development. We're looking at groups like development teams. We're looking within those development teams, we may need project managers, we may need business analysts. We also may need quality assurance testing, UAT testing, and also we may also require application support and maintenance. So these groups here in this category for application lifecycle management are usually handling apps like business critical apps, something that needs additional support. It's also something where we would want to use agile project management. We want to have cycles of development, maybe in two-week iterations. So that's when this process would come into play. Now, the next role is the IT department and data protection officer. We also want to consider them as our security. So, and also help desk. So this could be members of different departments, of course, but they do the operation, the maintenance, security, handling licensing. They're basically more of an all-encompassing admin. These could be the people that actually control the Power Platform governance. These could be the people that could control the Center of Excellence starter kit. So they have a bigger responsibility. Also, data loss prevention policies, that could be another area, which is also part of that security platform. So these people tend to be end user support people and help desk, but there could also be other roles. So that's just a basis of like how far this could be expanded out. And the last is the support and training engineers. So these are the people that are the ones that would be supporting the nurturing side of the platform. So they help maintain the apps. They can organize business critical line of business apps as well. They are usually the power users. There's also been a term of power rangers. These are the Power App evangelists. Their technical assistance teams. It could be even a customer service group could be handling something like this, where they're supporting the community and also even helping with training and testing of apps. But they also are people that may use even Yammer to do more community widespread awareness and news feeds. So this group tends to be more nurturing and community side, and they usually are more advanced Power App users. So we'll go on to the next slide, and we are going to talk about how these roles are implemented into the backlog and support. So we should be on, next slide. Right, so implementation and backlog support. So as before, I had mentioned showing the backlog and more of like a high level. So the high level backlog basically just showed a description, a priority, and they say the hours that are needed. This is a different version that's a little bit more detailed. So for instance, this is an application request. So we would have ID set up. This would be something that would be installed with DevOps. So we would have like a DevOps project management for some of the apps if it requires that, like full development process. So we would have the task, the full requirements, the solution, notes, priority, our services, including the hours and anything additional that might be needed. This is prioritized by the high risk task first. There are backlog meetings that will be made to go over the estimates with the stakeholders that are involved in it. This could also be a situation where we create the backlog, and it could be somebody on the client side that would actually be doing the development. We do at Tallan also offer those services, but it could be either way. So we also take care of documentation for that. So if you are looking to, say you do want to build yourself, we do offer service guidelines that can be followed, which I'll be showing in the next few slides. And a client can take advantage of these for their own development resources. We also do have testing, and testing would be in several different layers. Of course, there's quality assurance testing that would be done, unit testing, UAT testing, where we would work with the end users for testing purposes, or within the if the Power Platform admin governance, if it was a Power Platform admin or a global admin that wanted to do the testing. We do have those options as well. So it can go from a simple, we're going to add an app or a flow, to a very complex application that requires a lot more. From that, we would have, if it was a complex, we would make sure to have project management and business analysts involved, besides development teams and quality assurance. So those are just some of the basics of the app development. So if you decide to go the route of documentation, we still provide it in any case, but we do some customizations for that documentation. So it's not just default Microsoft, but it is default you as a client and what your needs are. So if you could move to the next slide, please. And we'll talk about the first option, which is the governance documentation. So for the governance documentation, what we have here is the guidelines and support for performing governance tasks, and including development as well. The documentation is customized for you, and it's sectioned out by category. Now, if you can see here, these categories look familiar, don't they? Strategy and vision, admin and governance, and nurture and education, which is a big part of our presentation today. What we've done is we've categorized these items so that we could narrow down exactly what your governance structure should be. These are default, but then customized. So here with the guidelines, what we did is we simplified them into these different buckets. So strategy and vision, which we've talked about the Center of Excellence, and we've talked now about roles and responsibilities. And of course, we also have a delivery model. Admin and governance, as Eden has already gone over, we will be going over the same subject matters here, and then we have the nurture and education, which will be coming up next. In a way that we can break this down a little bit further is we're looking at, when we look at each section, for instance, here is a section on monitor and alert. So we give a definition of what monitoring and alerting is, and then we also, provide some of those resources on things like reports and resource usage. Let's see, tracking, user access, monitoring, Dataverse, monitoring new connectors, setting up alerts. Those are just some of the, we simplify it down to some of the main areas that we would cover. And then what we do, the customization side of this is the recommendations that we also provide. So the monitoring and alert, for instance, we have, if you can see, there's a monitor Dataverse capacity for like limitations on set capacity limits where needed. My screen's a little bit smaller. So the solutions are listed below. Now, if the solution requires development, we would rather have this in the backlog so we could talk about it as a development project. But there are also solutions that can be given that are things that you can use right away. Either the Center of Excellence provides, or the Power Platform Admin Center provides, or the Power Platform Admin View provides. So we would help guide you towards those solutions. So if this is a major pain point and this is something that you're dealing with on a regular basis, we want to make sure that your governance documentation talks about it because it's important for your business. So there's a listing in every single section here, monitor and alert being just the example of how we customize for you. Now, with that being said, you might come across some things that after the fact, the documentation may, if it is ever out of date and you have concerns, there are continuous updates and links that can be added to those sections. You can always check on updates to anything that might have changed in the Center of Excellence that could affect your reporting. So we also do provide that as well, so you can always be updated. So with this being said, we're also going to be looking at the service guidelines. So if you could flip to the next slide. Okay, now the service guidelines are a little bit different than the governance documentation. The governance documentation is very customized for company-wide usage, geared to your business, where the service guidelines are more of a default. This is what you should be doing, and these recommendations are not as customizable. They could be if you have maybe a few extra additions, but what we're looking at here is simple steps and best practices for creating and managing Power Apps and Power Automate for your organization. So you're going to be looking at these checklists here. So when you're looking at this, the documentation acts as a phased approach. So this is like a source of training as well, and for understanding each phase. So the phases include the planning phase, the approval and evaluation, the design phase, the development phase, the testing phase, the publishing, and the app maintenance. So this is scaled more for, okay, we have had sessions with you, and we're going to give you the basics to follow for your continued use of the Power Platform. So we're going to give you the tools you need to be able to take this on your own and work off of it. So I showed an example of a planning phase here. So as it shows here, planning is the most important part of the app making process. And when you're planning, you should use the following checklists, and so you can build your app properly. So if you look at some of the items in the checklist here, it's like, what problems are you trying to solve, defining your goals, identifying your user, defining tasks. There's many that you can go through here. And if you check these off, this helps you better understand how to plan for your app. Now, besides the planning phase here, there are approval and evaluation steps that can be taken, and also we would go through the design phase, the making phase, the testing phase, and the publishing. Let's see. Do we have a question here? No? Okay, just checking. So let's see. So we also have another option for app maintenance too. So we give you guidance on how you can maintain your apps after they've been developed, and also maintaining the Center of Excellence as well. So if you're looking to keep, just keep your Power Platform governance tidy, it would be good to make sure to keep app maintenance in mind. So with that, we have from the planning phase here, I know we were talking about app request process, but I'd like to go over this one in even a little bit more detail by going through some of the workflow that we discussed earlier and getting a better view. All right, can we go to the next slide? Okay. So the Center of Excellence Starter Kit delivers apps, which are tools to provision app makers. We do have a few choices when it comes to that, and the apps that assist in the intake process for requesting app development. So even though we provide some documentation on how to do this for makers, we also there are also some tools that you can take advantage of that are already pre-built. And these pre-built tools can also be customized. Mostly everything you see in the Center of Excellence does have room for customization. So the innovation backlog and maker assessment are the tools we're going to be looking at. But before we do, just to go into a little bit more detail on the app request process itself, we're looking at the customized version. It's important to look at some of the other steps that are involved in each section. So some of this was mentioned before. This is all part of that evaluation checklist. So by looking at the workflows, you can get a better understanding of, okay, let's make sure that we have all these items in place first before we move on to the next step. And that will help you prioritize your apps. A lot of times these steps are taken on a more application full development lifecycle. For this situation today, we're going to be talking about these two apps as well. So you're going to see a little bit of overlap here, but you can see that there could be room for more. So let's move on to the next slide and talk a little bit about innovation backlog. And this is more of an introduction to the demo you'll be seeing later. So what is the innovation backlog? So the innovation backlog app gives you, your business users a place to record and prioritize their wish list of digital innovation. So this is something where your teams can use this app to submit ideas. This is also something where I was talking about roles and responsibility that requester could potentially add in and request an app as an idea. And your teams can use the app to submit ideas that will help with their pain points in their current process. And there's a wizard in here that describes and that helps you through all of the questions and information that you need to provide. And this actually goes into a summary, and there's measurements that are set to look at these improvements. The information is then calculated for ROI, and there also is a complexity score that is taken from the application. So what you can do is development groups can browse, or business groups can browse ideas that have been submitted, and they can vote on the ideas to add, for their pain points that they want. It's if they want to have an application developed, or if they're going to be the developers. And then what's most important is to pick the most high risk or most impactful ideas for the development teams to build out. So it's there's several different people that can go into this app to either suggest ideas or take ideas and share ideas that can be further developed. If we can go to the next slide, we're going to talk about maker assessment. There is a connection between the two. Okay, thanks. All right, so the maker assessment, what this is it's the assessment and where we ask users a series of questions, and for their target audience, the data and support, what are they planning to do, what kind of information are they going to provide, are they going to have support, licenses, considerations, we're talking about is the maker advanced enough for the application that they may be developing. We want to talk about their possible solutions. And since the app is integrated with the innovation backlog, what normally is asked in the beginning is if you have an innovation backlog already installed, the maker assessment is going to ask you for that solution idea. So it's going to ask for a connection between the two. And this assessment goes a little bit further. The questions are customizable too. So that means if you want to assess the maker, you can assess the maker. If you want to assess an app, you can actually assess an app. But we'll be going over that in more detail. So this is one of those tools that will help with the with provisioning app development as well, just like the innovation backlog, and making sure that the apps come through are approved and are necessary for development. Okay. So on to the next slide here, path forward. So service offerings after Power Platform Governance is established. So we're nearing the end here. This is when we're getting ready for complete handoff, but we do offer a lot of good support. So the Power Platform Governance support, we do offer that option through documentation, through meetings, through walkthroughs, through training, where needed. So this can be a vast amount of things, but by looking at some of the documentation we have in place, that's part of that support. We also offer the Center of Excellence Starter Kit support and upgrades too. So sometimes, depending on the client and the situation, upgrades can be very easy or very difficult, depending on your knowledge base and on how much you know about the Center of Excellence, or even if it's just a timing issue. So we do offer that kind of support as well, and any additional custom development that could be needed after the platform is in place. So we do offer like Power App, Power Automate, and Power BI support and development. So it's something to take advantage of, because even after the fact, you may find that there's more that you need. Then also, as we mentioned before, training, workshops, and community support. So we have the options to put those together. We have training in a day. We have things like app in a day as an example that we'll be looking at, where we can train your makers, we can train your administration, or we can just provide news and guidance where needed. But that path forward is, so it's never really over till it's over. You never know. And we also do provide maintenance support, where needed. It's in our documentation, but also something that can be requested. We take a look at the next slide, please. Okay, so to go over the roles and responsibilities here, we're looking and path forward. In summary, the roles operating the Power Platform, there are numerous roles, as we've seen, many roles that could be added to the deck. There are some companies that have one or two people that might be running the actual Power Platform Governance or Center of Excellence, and there could be teams and teams of people that would be handling this. But there are also many different layers. But the four main categories is what the majority of people are a part of as far as teams. But it's something to always be extended on. Also, and then when we go into implementation of the backlog, again, this is something where it could be as simple as we'll be creating documentation. It could be just a basic app development or flow development, all the way up to advanced full applications lifecycle development. For governance and service guideline documentation, mentioned that before. This is your your go-to after the engagement has come to a close or is just ongoing but needs additional support. And then app request process, keep this in mind, because this is your backbone of why we have Power Platform Governance to begin with. We need to know the apps that are coming in and out. We need to be able to track this. We need to make sure the apps are what the usage is, what the licensing is, and it all starts with when the app is built. So processes like this are very important. And then, of course, we're saying path forward. So a path forward as it stands is, we're trying to push this to the next level of companies, clients taking this information and being responsible for it, on their own, or having the right education to govern themselves. But with always, we do always have the option for support, but in essence, we'd like to educate you as much as we can. And with that being said, is there any questions? I think I saw some coming through, but look just yet here. Oh yes, I have a couple. I see two questions that have come up. The first one is, this is my current roadblock for me to use Innovation Backlog, Maker Assessment, and Developer Compliance Center. I need all of my potential users to be licensed with Premium. It's my dream to be able to use these, but likely need to find a way around. Some ways around this would be, custom app process. The licensing these are premium licensed apps, so you are correct about this, but there are other avenues to take within teams that can be considered. Do innovation backlog and maker assessment require Dataverse premium licenses for all? These are premium licensed apps, so unless they've been built in teams with a Teams and Dataverse for Teams, premium licensing is always needed, and it depends on your basic licensing. So yes, and we're going to be talking about this more as we move forward into the nurture and education. Is there any more questions before we move forward? Or Eden, did you have anything to add?
No, I was just going to say that the only other way around the premium licensing is the Dataverse for Teams, unfortunately.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, so with Dataverse for Teams, especially with like an Office 365 E3 license, if you have Dataverse for Teams and the app has been built in Teams, that will help you around some of the premium connectors. But any Power app that's a standalone that you just be accessing through a browser that has a premium connector, you need to have premium licensing for. Okay. Let me see, I have one more question here. I did load the COE solutions in Dataverse for Teams, but the apps like developer compliance can only be shared with security groups. Oh, I see a couple here. With up to 1,000 members, I was told that this was going to change. That could potentially work. Okay.
And
right.
Christina,
Yeah,
from what I understand, it is on the horizon.
Okay.
So I know that it's 1,000 members right now, but what I'm being told is that will be changing. So.
Okay, great. All right, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ben Dewey now for the nurture and education piece.
Thank you. So let me go ahead and take over the screen share here. All right. So yeah, as Christina mentioned, I'm going to really focus on the nurture and education. And I know we heard a lot about the governance today, and I think that's an important part to kind of get set up. But really, one of the keys to really trying to bring IT out of that the cost center mindset and start really driving business value is really unlocked with some of the nurture components, because you're able to start looking at where the business needs to drive value, where the ROI is, and I think leveraging this and taking advantage of this is definitely an area that is going to empower you to have your hands in more of the kind of the business impact of what needs to be done around the company. I'm going to talk about a couple different sections. First off, just go through a little bit of some of the tools. I know we saw some tools already, but I'm going to show some of the ones that are specific to the nurture component. Talk a little bit about some of the evangelism and training once you've identified some of those makers, what you can do with that. And then finally kind of end with some of the end user support and talk about some case studies about how companies are doing this. Okay, just taking the beginning slide. Sorry about that. So again, just kind of looking at the checklist of things, the nurture is kind of set up at the end after we've installed the Center of Excellence is when we start to look at training and onboarding makers. So I just wanted to kind of center people on where we're at as part of this governance strategy. And then from here, seem to be having some technical difficulties. My slide's not advancing. All right, this is going to be painful then. So looking at the pieces of the nurture component, as we mentioned, the Center of Excellence is broken up into a number of different components. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the pieces of the nurture component. The very first one on the onboarding side is there as a welcome email. So whenever you create a flow or an app, it triggers that as a new maker into the Center of Excellence Dataverse. That new maker triggers the welcome email. And we'll go ahead and also add them to a security group and give them some information that's customizable for you on what you want them to know about the Center of Excellence and the overall Power Platform within the company. There's also a newsletter with product updates that's provided. So this information is something that we find it often helpful for the makers so that they can see what's going on in the Power Platform community. We talked a little bit about the training in a day. So we do offer the training in a day kind of programs, but there's a ton of documentation out there for you to run those yourselves. And then there's tools built into the Center of Excellence to handle both the registration as well as kind of the feedback and reminder flows to keep people up to date about when their events coming up. After we, the last one on the onboarding is a template catalog. It ties in a little bit more with theming because when you start to build up the themes, you can use the templates to kind of drive that. But there's also ways within the template catalog to kind of get people excited. You can have different template apps that people can see and allows them to kind of get excited. And it's a good tool for onboarding new makers so that they are able to get a feel for what's going on. When we move on to the middle section, one of the big pieces of the nurture component is the ability to identify who the top makers are. And there's a couple different techniques I'll show, but all that is in the Power BI component. So within the dashboard, there are components within there, and there's actually worksheets in there that will help you identify who those top makers are. And you can reach out to them and kind of create a program around making sure that they're brought on board, and then hopefully leveraging them to help build up a community around Power Platform and allow them to kind of help grow it. And the last one is the app catalog. That encourages adoption from the company overall, starting to kind of publicize and share what type of applications are available for people through the app catalog. You can feature them, you can categorize them, so it becomes a nice tool so that people know what is available. Is my keyboard working yet? No. I am not sure. I apologize that I can't seem to navigate my slides here. The first one I wanted to show here is the welcome email. I'm hesitant to go through because I'm going to go through quickly on these. So the welcome email, again, whenever you create a new app or flow, there's a trigger that happens and it sends an email out to the maker to let them know to welcome to the platform. It does also add you to an Office 365 security group of the makers so that has access to the SharePoint group or the Yammer site that you're setting up. So when you're setting up the Center of Excellence, there's an option to kind of specify a group that you want to use, and then you're able to leverage that group of all makers, and people will automatically get added to it as they start building out applications and flows. The next one is the newsletter. So as you see here, there's information that's provided, public information about the Power Platform so that everyone can kind of keep up to date on the news and what's happening with the Power Platform. And then the training in a day. So we have some samples here of both the registration as well, and then it also comes with some sample content, a sample agenda, as well as the reminders and the invites that will go out to the participants. The last one I wanted to, actually there's one more, the nurture dashboard components. There's a couple big ones I want to highlight, and I'll do as part of the demo. The first one is just the overall makers list, so you can see what makers are using the apps the most or creating the most apps. But you can also look at the app gurus, which is a kind of a special view of the makers and how many connectors they're using and the variety of connectors, which can be a good sign as to how advanced that maker may be. And the last one I'm going to demo is the app catalog, which again highlights featured applications and applications that you want to show and kind of publicize out to the organization. All right, so first thing I want to do, I know we talked a lot about this, but I do want to just highlight the link aka.ms/COE starter kit. So this is a link out to COE aka.ms COE starter kit. This is a link out to the Power Platform Center of Excellence documentation. I saw a couple people in the comment have already been using this. This is great. This is a very good tool. The documentation in here is very good. There's a couple sections I want to draw your attention to. What's in the COE toolkit is very good at kind of looking at the different components and specifically the nurture components, which we'll come back to. But also under the COE, how to use the COE, there's some information about the COE dashboard. And inside there's also a nurture component. So these are the two dashboards that I really wanted to highlight as part of the nurture component. The first one being the maker slide. So what this slide lets you look at is the different makers that are in the company, who's creating the most apps, where they're located, both from a department perspective as well as a geography perspective. In addition, there's also another one here, which is the App Gurus. What's really nice about here, and it actually mentions it in the documentation, is you'll see newer app makers are typically going to use just the Office 365 user. So you may see a maker who has 30 different applications, but all of them are only using a single connector, which is the Office 365 user. That's typically a sign that that person might be a little bit new to the platform. It might be someone that you want to reach out to give them a little bit of coaching around and training around what other connectors they can use so they can start leveraging the platform to the fullest of their abilities. And conversely, if you see a maker who is using lots of connectors, that's typically a good sign that they're a little bit more on the advanced side. And they're somebody you're going to want to reach out to be one of your champions. Okay. On the welcome emails, I'm going to kind of skip over a little bit of the welcome emails, and I will go to the training of the day materials. One of the best ways to get to the training of the day materials is if you really are looking more within the training application itself. So let me switch over to our Center of Excellence environment. And there's two different training applications in here. There is the Power Platform Training Management, as well as the training registration that I spoke about. Within the training management section, you can see what applications or what events you have registered and the people that have registered for that event. But up here in the top right-hand corner, you'll see the download of the training content. And if you click on that link, then you'll see here a full list of all the training materials that are available. So if you want to go ahead and perform this training for your organization, the materials are all here that are provided for you. You can obviously go through it piece by piece, or you can take the materials that you want and kind of customize your training. All right. So moving on, the next section that I want to talk about, and I apologize for going so fast. I'm just trying to make up a little bit of time so I can leave Adam, our last speaker, some time. So in terms of, after we've identified the makers and we've kind of onboarded people and we're starting to look through things, another way to kind of really get people and start driving consistency within the platform is the theming components. So there is a theme creator within the Power Platform. The theme creator allows you to, let me bring it up actually. No, I'll jump over to it later. So the theming component allows you to basically customize how you want the controls to look and feel, the colors, the fonts, and the sizing of everything. Once you save the theme, there is also a theme browser that you can leverage. And then within your applications, you can go ahead and start leveraging those themes. Another good way to leverage those themes is within a template. So if you build out a template, you can leverage the template catalog to publish that template. And then if that template has the theme in there, then everybody who's building apps within the company, if they're using that starter template, is going to automatically have the company branded theme as part of it. And they don't have to worry about applying the theme as they initially build their own applications. The last two pieces I wanted to mention, which Christina already covered, so I'll just go briefly over them, is the maker assessment and the innovation backlog. So I'm just going to jump ahead to the demo of these components here. All right. Okay, so move around. So the first thing I wanted to show was the COE theme editor. So within the COE theme editor, you have the ability, as we saw, to customize any of the colors. So in this case, we have a Tallan theme. If you click on it, you can edit it. And then from there, you're able to customize all the colors and the fonts that you need for your application. And then within an application here, our application, pardon me. Let's go back over to this app. So I have an application. I'm going to actually just quickly show you how you apply that theme. So we have here, I meant to edit that, apologize. So if we edit this application here, which is just a sample demo application. I'll maybe come back to this. Oh, here we go. All right, so from here, if you look at the app, when the app loads up, so on start of an application, you just go ahead and set the theme name to whatever theme name you were provided or you found as part of that theme gallery or the theme editor. So this single line is what allows you to kind of apply the theme, and then automatically all your application has the themes that are provided as part of that theme that was built out. So the maker assessment we already covered. It's a great tool for kind of defining the ideas, but I want to focus on the question that was asked about the center of the innovation backlog, specifically looking at the ROI and how we track that. So this is an application that's public for everybody within the organization, assuming that they have the proper licenses. And what you can go ahead and do is add an idea. From here, if we want to go ahead and say I want to, automate an accounts payable, which is a fairly common request that we get. So automating accounts payable, if you hit next, then it'll go ahead and tell you, what the people affected. So in this case, I have our finance team is impacted, and got 12 people in that team that are impacted by that. In terms of the tools, we might want to use something like Outlook because we're getting a PDF that's emailed to us, and then I could even use a PDF tool to load that in. But there's some other tools in here that an advanced maker may know of. One of them that we use is a tool called Form Recognizer. And Form Recognizer is a tool that allows you to go ahead and parse out a document or a PDF and recognize what's in there and extract specific fields that are tagged or not even tagged, actually. This here is just kind of noting it. So it's as part of the idea, and as we're forming that, we'll put that information in, and allows them to kind of just have that as a note for the team. And then the fourth step here that I really want to highlight is the measuring of the ROI. So for something like this automation task, you can add something. In this case, we're looking at time spent retrieving data. We'll say time spent on manual work because we're kind of extracting something from a PDF. And then here, as part of it, you can specify how many people are performing the task. So we have kind of everyone in the organization who's doing it, and it takes them, let's say we get, let's say 30 minutes per invoice. Let's say 10 minutes per invoice, and it happens, 4 times a week. So from there, we can go ahead and save this, and it'll calculate it out. To let us know our ROI is 35 hours a month wasted on this task. So hopefully that kind of answers the question that was in the chat around what we're looking at in terms of how do we track the ROI. Once you go ahead and save this, we'll kind of just hit the back button because it saves it. Oh, no, I'll go through it. The last one was the complexity score. So here now we get that idea added in here. And the benefit of the innovation backlog is once this idea is there, it allows a place for people to collaborate. So from here, we can start to form a team around it. We can start to update the status or assign a developer to it. There's the idea of liking an item, so we can start prioritizing, what are the most popular ideas that are out there, and start to figure out whether we want to assign any developer resources, what that might look like. Okay, going back to the slides here, going to kind of rush through a little bit of that. The last section I wanted to talk about was about the community. So the Center of Excellence does provide both, the option for a SharePoint site or a Yammer site. We do recommend that you have some form of one of those sites available to kind of embrace the community and bring them on board once you start to identify them. And there's a couple of use cases out there. I'll leave them for the team for you to research a little bit later. One of them, and there's a couple articles online about it, is from a company called Standard Bank. They grew their team from 2 to around a team of 25 that were building out applications, creating templates and a center of excellence around their actual maker community. So some of the core tenets within that is, they wanted to have that bottom-up approach. They wanted to really focus on education, giving people the power to go ahead and build their own and innovate on their own within their job and make what was most beneficial for them. They wanted to really kind of ultimately create the hype and make sure that not only, as applications were being built, that people were using them, but they were kind of using the applications to kind of build a community and build the hype around people building their own applications. And then from the top was really empowering some of the leadership to really understand what the power of the platform was, some of the cost-saving ideas of the ROI, and really trying to foster that innovation culture. It's a balancing act with some of the security and the innovation, and trying to find, this community to help kind of drive the innovation side, and allow people to kind of feel that they could leverage the platform to the best of their ability. The last case study I wanted to highlight was the Power Rangers one. Saw that in the chat as well. So it's so bad it's good with the name, and I think this is an example of a company, GlaxoSmithKline, that had about over 1,000 members as part of the development community. They're leveraging that community to answer simple questions like, is this, is Power Apps a good use case for this? Figuring out ways to mentor other makers and bring people on who are just starting off, giving them a place to ask questions to a community, having a knowledge base as a part of that community that people could then search and find their own answers if they needed to. So I apologize for running through that so quickly. I did want to leave some time for our last speaker, Adam, to go through some of the final slides. And so with that, if there's not any questions, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Adam.
All right, sure. Thank you, Ben. I'll take back control.
Apologize again for my slides not navigating properly.
No, you say that, and I don't know if it's something wrong with the actual presentation file, but I'm actually having the same issue. So let me do this old-fashioned screen share here. Hold on a second, folks. Maybe too many of us are in this thing. All right, I'm sharing my screen. Try to compress this down a little bit. All right, I just want to take a quick second to kind of wrap up. So we went through a lot, obviously, 2.5 hours or so of content. But as I think that implies that this is not an overnight thing; it's a journey. Everybody's kind of in a different place, and this kind of gets adjusted a little bit for every organization. But if you're starting out, the proof of concept stage, the first thing, that first dot there is the environment. It's obviously very important to kind of get that set up correctly and bolted down the way you want. Even for that first little team, get those initial licenses issued. And then we've made this sort of point throughout the presentation about governance 1.0, and really what we're trying to say there is don't try to make it perfect. You will have time. You will need to iterate to future versions of this. So get that basic monitoring in place. Hopefully with something like the Microsoft COE starter kit. There's a ton of reporting there, visibility into what's going on in your environments. And then, start to focus on those end users and getting them, the support that they need, and starting that community early so that ultimately that builds some momentum. And, to that point earlier about how to scale these programs, the initial users become evangelists, and, ultimately they can answer some of the more technical questions, somebody getting stuck on how to build a particular app, and more technical issues like that, they can help each other. And as the community in your organization grows, that's when you can start to scale your governance, looking for things like alerting. Do I need to go run those reports, or can there be ways for the reports to notify me when things need my attention as an admin? And then all the way through to automating, and especially if you've got a larger organization, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of employees, and you do want to keep that team lean. You're going to want to lean on some automation. And what's kind of cool about it all is what we're seeing is essentially you just build more Power Apps and more flows to kind of govern or help govern your environment. And so it's essentially using the tools to govern the platform, which is kind of neat. Just circling back to those questions we had, at the beginning that we were wanting to, answer throughout. Keeping your teams lean, so just touched on it, using all the way through to something like automation, not having any single, maybe one team or one person to own the platform. There are ways to do this. And we talked about, roles and responsibilities. If you can divide up those duties, you're not putting all the burden on any one individual or one team's shoulders. as you leverage the technology and you build out and enhance, some of the reporting and the toolkit capabilities, you're obviously now employing technology to do some of the heavy lifting. So that's another way to potentially get around that challenge. The impatient power users, we mentioned that there are kind of two sides to this. So, because it's that sort of phased approach, and if you're in that proof of concept stage or with that first department, there's certainly a way, to get them started in especially a dev environment, and figure out that priority list of what needs to be tackled before we start anything, but also, what can we leave for, let them get started on development, because that's going to take a little while where they learn the technologies and start to, poke around and try things. And it doesn't have to become, enterprise grade production deployment. It's not going to become that overnight anyways. So that'll buy you a little bit of time. And then if you've already got started and maybe you're further up the curve, or maybe, on the x-axis, you've got some teams, using the platform, but you've got maybe a little bit to go on the y-axis in terms of maturity. There's certainly ways to kind of come in after the fact. Obviously, if they've gone too far and they've deployed stuff and they're using it, there's a little bit of change management to work through. But there's certainly ways to get folks to kind of follow rules, and ultimately within an organization we all have to follow certain rules that are established at some point. So there's ways to circle back to that as well. In terms of next steps, so this is if you've started, I think in some of the chats we've seen folks are already doing this. The toolkit, you can tell, or the starter kit, sorry, it used to be called the toolkit. Now it's called the starter kit, rightfully so. The starter kit, we're all a big fan of because there's just so much information there. But some of these other bullets in the left-hand column here, establishing that environment strategy so that you really have some idea of how you're going to group the applications and where they'll live, and you can have a little bit of control and ultimately have, for those more high-impact applications, have that production environment, not just everything in one, because that's a little bit messy. There's data loss prevention policies that Eden alluded to, and the different ways of segregating them between business data, non-business data, and completely, connectors that are shut off. Those logs and analytics, we talked about some of them being in the admin center, others being in the COE toolkit, which obviously you don't have to start from scratch. That's a great toolkit. One thing that we talked about earlier in the session, the whole side of the Power BI world, which we didn't really touch on today. There's not really a lot of Center of Excellence toolkit over there. And so, it's really nice to see the investment Microsoft's made here, and it's all open source, so you can extend it for your needs. And then, Ben touched on, well, let me not skip over automating and auditing processes, because especially some of you are from highly regulated organizations. So as you try to figure out how to meet some of those compliance and regulatory requirements that you might be faced with for different, certain applications, this will be obviously very important. But you don't have to start there. Most of our clients don't start with the most, complex solutions. You build your way into it. And then, as Ben alluded to, making sure we don't forget the makers, and we understand, their capabilities, their drive, and how much time do they have? Because this is not going to be, if they don't have the hours to devote to building a Power App, how are they really going to get it done? And what can we do to ultimately make them successful? So there's a lot, obviously, here, and hopefully you guys can take care of a lot of it yourselves. If you do need help, I think Christina's done a good job of walking through, our process, and we can help you install that toolkit even, because it is a few hours worth of work on a good afternoon. And then it drives right into, using that toolkit to understand what's already been deployed at your organization, the environments, the apps, the flows, getting a good handle on that, how you support other technologies, right? Because Power Platform is just one more thing. If you're already supporting Teams, SharePoint, Exchange, and even other non-Microsoft technologies, there's an IT operations process, and hopefully, some of this can plug into that. And then, understanding what those early adopters are doing, so that we can cater to their success, and then they can become those future evangelists. And that bleeds right into that rest of that process, which essentially is down on this slide. Those two blue columns basically fold into that first column of what Christina laid out. And if we do that, then we can cruise through everything else if you guys need the help. So be happy to help in any way that we can. And even outside of all that, if beyond the session today you guys have questions, we'll send over these slides. You'll have our contact information. Feel free to reach out. Always happy to talk through this and help you guys with the success of your Power Platform initiatives. All right, I think we nailed it right on time, 4:29 on the East Coast. So one last call for questions. Otherwise, we'll wrap up for the day and follow up with you guys over email. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for joining. See you next time.